I'm going to turn it over to John. And John, I will let him introduce himself, and then I'll let each panelist talk about who they are. So let's welcome our panel.
All right, is this one on? Can you hear me okay? Perfect, all right. Welcome everyone, thank you. This is gonna end up a recap of a great day. We've shared a lot of information so far in the presentations, so now hopefully we'll get some insights to go along with that. As Kim said, my name's John Allen. I'm with Darktrace. I'm their VP of Cyber Risk and Compliance. I'm very excited to be moderating the panel here. I'm going to try my best, but in all honesty, this is just a dry run for me. The real show is tomorrow when I try and teach cybersecurity to my daughter's brownie troop. So if I can control these guys, maybe I'll be able to control a group of second graders.
I doubt it.
Doubt it, yes. But the good thing is that the brownie troop, their leaders presented them all the different options of activity badges that they could go after during the year, and they got to vote on them. And it's pretty cool that they voted cybersecurity as one of them that they wanted to learn about. So, yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and just introduce our panel a little bit more. So we have Steve Winterfeld. So as Kim said, he's the advisory CISO at Akamai. Steve's experience includes the finance sector as well as retail. And then as being the voice of the customer for Akamai's security vision team, he's got a very broad perspective. So excited to hear that. Ron comes to us from Lake County, Indiana, Superior Court Juvenile Division. He's CISO and CTO there. His experience goes from government to telecom, academia. So he's a leader, a practitioner, and a teacher of cybersecurity. Very interesting. And then Tellis is our CISO at the Dream Exchange. His background includes banking, insurance, and consulting. Right now he's responsible for securing the capital market for a new stock exchange, which is, yes, surely a target. And then Liz Ogunti, CISO at JBT Corporation. Liz, I like her background. She comes from an IT audit and compliance background, both internal and with a Big Four firm. And she has experience in the financial sector. And as the CISO at JBT, she protects technology involved with food processing, air transportation, and autonomous vehicles. So a broad perspective here. Hopefully this will be engaging, maybe a little confrontational. We'll get some energy going. We'll see. And let's begin. So my first question, we're going to go through topics. First, I want to talk about current state of cybersecurity. Then I want to talk a little bit about how you communicate cybersecurity. And then let's talk about how do you combat threats. So current state of cybersecurity and cyber threats. So at the top of everyone's mind is nation-state attacks. We hear it in the news. It's all over the place. What's the real threat of a nation-state attack to an ordinary organization? So I'm not talking, a huge infrastructure play, but just everybody out there on the street. What's the real risk for a nation-state attacker coming after them?
So it's problematic to go to your board and say what that is. I know that if you get into the news in the wrong way, suddenly you can become a target. I've been in a company that, just by chance got political news around them, and suddenly you're on a different field. So what I would say is, if you're reading one of the FBI reports, because I want to turn information into action. So you're going to get an FBI report. If you go down to the bottom, it's going to say, this is where they got their information. It's going to give you an APT number and a link over to MITRE. When you go to MITRE and you look up APTs, you can map an APT, so say APT 39, you can map it over to the MITRE attack framework and see what they would actually do to attack you. You can then go look in your operations center, your penetration testing team, your vulnerabilities, and saying, the way an APT would attack me, would I be vulnerable for this particular one? And so how many APTs are out there? We got numbers, we got minerals, there's just a plethora of them out there. But when you are suspecting that you may be, that's the way I turn it into action.
Thank you.
So when we speak of nation-state actors, I think it's important for us to first understand what the motive for a nation-state actor would be outside of critical infrastructure, which it has an obvious motive. many countries like China don't want to destroy the U.S. They just simply want to knock us back a peg and increase their value. And they think they can do so by knocking us back a peg. So every company should worry at some point about nation-state actors as a threat, simply because if they can disrupt our economy, they've done just that. They've knocked us back a peg or two. The reality, though, is that nation-states have so many resources that there's very little you are going to be able to do to stop them if you're targeted. At best, you can have the tools that would allow you to monitor. Maybe you can catch them while they're in. But there's very little you can do to stop them from getting in. They have too many resources thrown at you for that to happen. They have the time, the time to go undetected as they develop the tools, right? Many times, the average hacker can't create a 0 day. While they're trying to develop the 0 day and they're testing it out, absolutely you're going to get caught. Nation states can hide that. So that's our reality.
Interesting. So I'm going to twist it. Take it more. So if nation-state attackers are out there and you can't stop them, and you've actually got recently cyber insurance companies putting into their policies exclusion statements, and Lloyd's actually advised all of their affiliates that would write policies, you have to include one of these there that would exclude coverage for a nation-state attack. How do you address that? Does that negate the need for cyber insurance totally, or what do you do?
I think from an insurance company perspective, I used to work for an insurance company here before. The risk, if they're not going to make any money at it, they're out, and that's where they're at right now. Our problem becomes, we have other states that have said they're not going to pay the ransomware, right? Well, the problem with that is that, the real nut of it is if they can't get paid by cryptocurrency, and guess what? They don't get paid. So we don't stop the source. We talk about it, but we don't do it. And the other thing is that, North Korea obviously has spent a lot of time. They figured they can't beat us technology-wise. They can't beat us in the battlefield. They can't beat us financially. We have too many relationships with other countries in the world. So the only chance they got, our weakest point right now is our technology. We just plug in everything to the internet. It's gone on Shodan. You can see stuff that's connected and why is it on there. I don't connect my washer and dryer. I don't want to know when my stuff is done because I don't want to fold my clothes. Sorry. I don't know what the point is.
Your shirt's a little wrinkly, Ron.
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
It out right in time.
I try to buy the stuff that's wrinkle-free because I don't have to do it. So it's just that we have certifications out there that, they're outdated as soon as the thing gets published. So then how do we train our people to effectively, think? We haven't, I've been teaching since 2010. And unfortunately, our students at the college level they go into the academic office and they have their parents talk for them. Well, what good does that do? You got to make mistakes, right? The only way you learn. And you got to have people that can think on the fly. That's what I prefer. I don't know about, it's just, I'm not looking for, I can teach you the stuff. I can look up on how to set the configurations correctly, right? We can all resource that. But when are we going to get real about it and say, hey, look, let's start, these people I'm working on a cyber program right now that's going to be real. Why can't we patch? What's the problem with these kinds of things? Why, I protect the court side. With the juvenile side. So you can just imagine, it's the first time in history that we've had somebody cross the line and call a judge because they haven't even gotten a verdict on their case yet because they want to see their kid. Well, wait your turn. It's not, but we're also struggling with an issue with people, the last stat that 26% of the population has a medically diagnosable mental illness. We don't address that issue. We could take all that money that they're still from the cyber side and put it into that kind of funding. I'm just trying to say that the nation states are just hitting our weakest point. You can't put sanctions on a country and expect them not to retaliate. They're just being smart. That's what I would do. If you're struggling to survive, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So,
real quick, so you mentioned putting together the patching program. Let me switch to vulnerabilities. So a lot of vulnerabilities have hit the news lately. You've had patches that have needed to be applied, as soon as possible. That the vendors have said. Some would argue that that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just what's coming to the surface. Underneath the water, you've got this huge, risk sitting there. what is that risk, I guess? And maybe Steve, you want to take it, and Liz, I'd like to get your insights too. What are you concerned about in your organization as your big security risk going forward, or what do you hear from your clients?
I would say something that's huge is our technical debt. The amount of all the technical debt all of us are carrying, both in the security side and on the IT side. We have great money being poured into transformation and almost no money being poured into getting rid of technical debt. And then on vulnerabilities, we have product vulnerabilities like SolarWinds. That takes a certain team, a lot of vendor management and a couple other people. We have protocols, Log4j, different team. Where am I using Log4j? Where is that protocol even running in my organization? And then once I know what it's running, who can map the value of the data that it's touching? We've got WannaCry, a threat-based one. Again, going back to mapping out threat activities in more perimeter, less inside, a different team. Vulnerabilities around VPNs or other infrastructure, but VPNs are old. We've seen just a rash of security issues around VPNs. That's a different team. And finally, we have stuff like Stuxnets with IoT, and do we even know where we have IoT in our network? And so when I talk about tech debt, when we talk about vulnerabilities, I think you need to move out of incident response into crisis management and map out the right teams to deal with all those different kind of problems.
Yeah, from my perspective, the main risk that I deal with, or that if you want to say keeps me up at night, although I sleep very well, but anyway, would be visibility, and you touched upon it, especially now with the move to IoT solutions. Making sure that my team is aware of what's actually sitting on the network, what's actually sitting in the cloud, trying to prohibit teams' abilities to spin up something and we not know about it. Because I know from experience, they can do that, and then all of a sudden we're like, hey, what's that over there? Oh yeah, we did this. Okay, but it's not secure. What's it for? Why is it there? That's just another vector that, can be exploited for our environment. So for me, it's visibility. And, you have tools out there that you can try to put out there on the network, but there's always some gap somewhere that someone can find out and then just do what they want to do. But then, like you said, when you're talking about the vulnerabilities, they're always going to be there. Because you have legacy machines out there that if they are not protected, if you don't have them somewhat, if you want to call it encrypted with like a bit 9 or something like that, you're not able to patch them. If they're not patched, then they're vulnerable. If they can get into your network, then they can exploit that vulnerability. So from a cybersecurity and a threat or a vulnerability, we're always going to have that. They're always going to pop up. I don't think we can keep up. We just can't. But you just have to make sure that you have a good incident response, you have good monitoring tools out there so that you can at least jump on it once you realize that something is going on.
Thank you.
So I agree with all of you, but I'm going to add some more, right? Because what would keep me up? Everything, right? But the reality is, if you could sum it up, it would be literally just a few categories. Visibility and everything is one, but that can be handled more so from a process standpoint in the organization, where you're included in anything before anything goes up. Nothing is built without your approval first, right? Now, very difficult to get, right? The last organization I was in, I did not have that. I'm fortunate to be able to do that now. And trust me, I don't take that lightly. But then the other thing you have to worry about with that as a consequence is information overload, where now you're pulling in so much and are a part of so much that you literally don't have the time or the staff to complete it. So that worries me, all right? The biggest thing that worries me, though, are the things that I don't know. Things that I don't know to even look for, right? So that's what keeps me up. Trying to suck in all of this information so that I do know, that I have a proper understanding of what the risks are surrounding it, that I'm able to monitorize what that risk is, understand what our financial risk is in the organization, and then to be able to certainly pass that information on to the key parties who have to accept that risk. So those are some of the things, but every one of those things are part of those categories, right? So yeah, we have a lot on our plates, guys. But to really understand the stuff, we're going to get a lot more on our plates. You know, the issue is, are we willing to do that fight? Because that fight is important.
Great. So I think it's not a great current state of cyber threats and cyber risk. I mean, we talked about nation states. I think Tellus's point, even if you're just an ordinary organization, you know, they're not necessarily trying to take down the whole US of A. They're trying to cause some impact. They could cause some impact with you probably and hurt our economy. So you may still be a target even though you think you might not be. Concerns about technical debt. I think that's very good to raise that. The visibility, the IoT being introduced, Ron talking about, you know, helping teach the teams how to think and how to work through these things. There's really, you know, this is unprecedented times and we're gonna need thinkers out there, not just following predefined rules. And then the last point about, I think, being overwhelmed and the unknown unknowns, as they're called sometimes, are certainly scary. Let's move on into how do you actually communicate those threats. And so, Ron, you've got the mic there. In a government organization or in a past life, boards, C-suite need to know about these risks, the threats, the vulnerabilities, need to understand them. What's the best way to communicate that up to them?
Well, if you're looking from a board perspective, you kind of got to build those relationships early on. I mean, it's probably been said time and again, but you don't want it to be where they flip a coin and they say, who's going to talk to the tech guy next? It's your turn, right? So it's just, you got to understand the business side of it. You know, why are they putting money in revenue versus in cybersecurity? Understand their thinking. You know, think about it for a second. What's the CEO thinking about? And, you know, some things at work he might help with his own personal technology, right? Because, you know, they have vulnerabilities in their own home systems, to be honest with you. Help them out with their kids. Build that trust factor with them so they trust what you think and what you say. Because I've been in organizations that, you know, and we all know this, that, you know, there's a very talented skill set out there, even in this room. We all know it. Everybody's talented in this room. But communicating that information to somebody that they understand and comprehend it and don't get afraid. We all use our own terminology. I mean, think about it. If you have a project at your house and the guy comes in, you never built a house before, and they start throwing terms at you, you're like, okay, what is he saying? But I don't want to seem stupid. But I don't know what he's talking about, right? All I want to know is I want it fixed, right? So like the financial officer wants to know how much it's going to cost me, right? CEO says, how am I going to grow this business? And I'm tied up in a myriad of security issues. So, and the thing I think you have to be clear about is, where is the data at? Tell me where it's at. What am I protecting? Like even your own personal data. As I said with the judge issue that just happened, people are crossing boundaries that never been crossed before. So the thing is, we have to educate those people, even the C-level guys, and say, hey, look, get your data cleaned off the internet yourself. Because then, you know what, if they grab your data and it's, you know, they have to test it to see if it's valid. Even though they steal it, maybe your address is old, right? We expose ourselves personally. A lot of our personal information is out there. What is it? 1.5 million Word documents Google has about every individual person. Why is that allowed to happen? I mean, I'm just asking dumb questions, but it just doesn't make any sense. And I'm not trying to go on a pulpit here, but it's just, and then our schools. Why are they hacking into our schools and stopping our kids from learning? Why? I mean, we're all tech guys. We could teach our kids to go in there and do it. Like lock this stuff down, you know, make it hard for them, create honeypots. You know, there's a lot of different things. You guys, I'm sure there's more solutions out there than I can name, right? But we got to focus on the core. Our youth are getting shut down. They're trying to, like you said, Tellus, the Chinese are trying to drop us down a notch. They're trying to steal our IP. Look at some of their, if you look at the war situation, look at some of their aircraft. Aren't they similar to ours? There's no ingenuity there. I mean, they use some of the Russian stuff, but they find out it doesn't work, right? So if you look at things from, they're trying to get our IP. I mean, there's an age-old case study that I used. There was a fluorescent light manufacturer that, spent 10 years, they said, I just want to put my stuff on the internet, didn't lock anything down, so a Chinese company takes it and then puts their 800 number on the box when they ship it out. Okay, so they won the court case, but too bad, it's too late. So we got to think of those simple things, and then when you communicate to the board, you have to communicate in simple terms that they can get. Okay, unfortunately, we get tied up in the minutiae. We all know the terminology, the technology. They don't. And sometimes they don't want to hear it because they're scared to death. They're scared if he says a word I don't understand, and I'm like, oh, that means money, and I ain't got it, right? Because I'd rather stand in marketing and a business acquisition. So we got a tough job. I mean, we're counselors, aren't we? People hate when their stuff doesn't work. We're the first ones they don't come to your team. They come to you. I'm frustrated with this. It just doesn't work. You're like, okay, then you got to settle them down for at least 10 minutes, at least, right? And then you're working through it. So some ways you might as well take a psychology class and call it a day, right? But I mean, I'm being fun, trying to be funny, but it's true. We just have to work. We have to work together and try. IT's been in a silo for a long time, right? It's been considered a necessity. It's like almost a necessity. I have to have it, but I don't want it. I mean, think about your car. I mean, isn't there 300 processors in there? And you just want the thing to start up and work, and the wipers to work, and the radio to work, and the windows to go up and down. And I'm hoping that the heated seats and the air-conditioned seats work, but I'm not counting on it, right? So it's the basic stuff. So we know this. This isn't micro-segmentation, that kind of stuff. That's legacy systems. They're still going to sit there because they work, right? So I don't mean to belabor the point.
No.
But
Anyone else on how do you communicate these? I think we've established the myriad of threats that are out there, but yeah, how do you communicate that up to the board? And at what frequency does that need to happen?
No, not daily.
Daily? You need to follow them around?
No, I mean, I'm sure that we can all remember the time when we first got into IT. We were the first people in our family that knew how to work computers. And so you bought your mom a computer, and she was all, oh, yeah, but then something didn't work. It's not working. Fix it.
Uh-huh.
They come to you, right? And you have to walk them through and tell them the story of, okay, what did you do? What did you click? Where did you go? What did you see? And but no, I'm serious. I do that to my mom now because she still does the same thing. They still all call me, even though I haven't done help desk in
You
years.
get the call, the internet isn't working.
Yeah, the internet's, well, is it plugged in, Mom?
you told me to stream this stuff, and I don't know.
I know you gave me Netflix, but I don't know. But anyway, my point is that for me, and my position was new for JBT. So I had the opportunity to kind of like strategically build a story for them, to strategically start from the beginning, basically, and tell them, what I was here to do. This is the kind of stuff that I'm going to be looking at, and they could ask questions. Well, why is that important? Well, because you don't want anybody to get to your IP because that's the bread and butter. So I'm going to go and do this to try to protect that. So over the years, I've just been telling them a story. I don't get too much into, well, yeah, we need to buy this tool to do this. It's more or less teaching them and educating them on the path that I want to take and where I want to get to. And I think it's worked. I mean, I'm still there. We haven't had any problems. So I think it's working. But another thing that's going to help all of us, especially publicly traded companies, is with the introduction of the SEC now becoming more involved in cybersecurity, wanting the boards to be more educated, wanting them to know the risks, the cybersecurity risks that are in their environment, being able to answer those questions. So I've noticed now, because I had to educate them on that as well in our last meeting. So, but I know that they're going to be starting to ask more questions because now, like with SOX, they're on the hook. They have to know. So now it's going to be a little easier for us. But we have to understand how to communicate. You can't use these acronyms. You can't use the tool names. You just have to tell them what it does. I put it on your machine so that nobody can get in there and get to your machine. You got to make sure it's running. That's what it does. And these are some numbers. There you go. And if they have questions, they're gonna ask. But you can't bore them with like you would talk to another CISO or an IT director or something, because they're just gonna gloss over and be done talking to you till the next time. Yeah.
You are absolutely correct. But, you know, so I have the advantage of having learned early on how to communicate with the board. First, you speak their language. The language of business are simply this: legal and finance, which means we need to learn an extra language, guys. Something that they understand, right? Because we do have to make these presentations in short order to talk about some very large, complex issues. But here's our secret sauce. Every breach now becomes your friend, because I will report that breach, and hopefully they know someone connected to the board at that particular company. It scares the heck out of them, right? And that forces them to move, because then they understand this could be me, right? What are you doing to protect us? Great. It opens the conversation for me. But even then, I still have to speak in their language for them to understand. Legal and finance. Monitorize it, guys.
That's a good point.
First of all, you were dead on. It's about a relationship. It's absolutely about being trusted. And going up and being a technology advisor, you will put yourself in a box you'll never get out of. You have to be a business partner. The other thing I want to say is, what is your mission? Your mission is to clearly provide them with an assessment of risk so they can make a decision. So that's my job, is just to make sure they understand the risk so they can decide what risks they're going to accept, what risks they're going to transfer to insurance, and what they're going to mitigate through whatever process we advise them is the most cost effective. So how often should we meet? I would go back to say, how often is a risk committee talking to them, and how often is the head of your technology talking to them? Because you should be right in that same bandwidth, as often as a risk committee or the CIO or whoever's talking about the technology. But yeah, ultimately, great advice.
All right, let me press you on that. So if you should talk every time the risk committee is, I mean, typically I would think the risk committee is presenting every time to the board on a different risk. One of those risks would be information security or cybersecurity, right? But you've got other ones. You've got geopolitical risks. You've got pricing risks, inflation, all of that. What about? So would you insert an additional piece every single time for cybersecurity, or is that?
In that case, in your example, I would say similar, some of those may be annual, some of those may be biannual, some of those may be every meeting. Different companies have board tempos at different rates as well. Some are meeting quarterly, some are meeting more often. But I would say more around, when you look at what risk is talking about, not every time they present, but are they going quarterly or are they going semi-annually in that? Other ideas?
Yeah. You know what, you're spot on. But with that risk, first, you should be part of the entire risk matrix. So this starts with us understanding our role is not just cyber. I hate it when we're referred to as cybersecurity. Cyber is one of my 3 towers. People, processes, technology. I have to cover all of those risks and advise on those. So why would I be limited to just this? So now this becomes part of your entire risk matrix for the organization. But that also means that we have to work with all of the other stakeholders and leaders in the organization so that we understand what their risks are in their processes, for instance, right? When they understand that everything that they do, literally, we're a part of, if we're truly serving our mission. That is also why I advocate that we should never be under a CIO. Right? It is a conflict of interest, and it limits us and puts us in a bottle that will now be responsible for understanding where that risk came from somewhere else. Maybe your people, most often your people. Then your processes. Your processes are flawed. I don't care what you spent on IT. I can spend $1 million on a system for access control. right? With full, egress zones and all of this other stuff. However, if the processes aren't there that the employees are letting people walk in behind them and they hold the door open, you just did it for nothing, right? So having the organization understand, and for you to understand, your job is much more than cyber.
So I want to press on that one more time
Sure.
on the risk and communicating with the board. So, and you said before earlier, tell us that the board's language is finance and legal.
Yes.
Finance, they're going to have financial plans out 3 years minimum.
Yep.
So they're going to see something coming down the runway. Legal, I mean, the statutes, they'll publish a recommendation, get input for 60 days. It'll take a year for anything to get signed, another year for it to get enforced, long runway. Cyber risk, should that fall under the same bucket and same frequency as those? How is it different?
So the frequency for those were made by the need of those things. The frequency for cyber needs to be made by the need for the frequency in cyber, right? None of those things did they come up with the frequency just arbitrarily. They're there for that reason. Cyber becomes just another thing where the frequency is based on the need.
The only thing I'll pitch in with this, because you've done a great job covering this, is that if you look at the processes, like, since I'll deal on the court and the legal side, officers have information on their laptop computers, right? What happens if that gets shut down? How do they process it? How do they know who to pick up? How do they know what to do? They go to their radios, right? You see now even the government's trying to go back to the ham operators because they're worried about, 911 networks have been compromised, and then they buy technology that doesn't cover all the zones. There's dead spots, which they won't tell you, okay? But, we are part of it's the people process that usually fails, not the technology typically. It's just we didn't understand what the process was and how it flows.
Good.
I want to emphasize one thing he said. Don't try to retrain your board, and you said this as well, to talk about cyber. The CFOs trained them how to think about risk. The risk committees trained them how to think about it. Leverage the training they've gone through and use the same format, don't try to come up with your own way to talk about risk.
Great. So Liz, you brought up something that I think is very interesting with the SEC rulings coming out saying that, now public traded companies have to report the education or, what education their board has been through regarding cybersecurity, which is sort of forcing them to have some education because you don't want to report that they had none. What questions is that then triggering from the board down into CISOs? And so if you can give me what you're seeing on that, and then the rest of the panel weigh in as well, and give me the strangest question that you've been asked or heard of someone being asked. So we've got, a room full and online of CISOs and aspiring CISOs. Like, what's the gotcha that's either driven by this regulation or it's just going to come out of left field that a board's going to ask you?
Well, it's still relatively new. It's still, so it hasn't had the opportunity to sink in or marinate yet. So I haven't really had to field too many new questions from my board. But I do know that one of the requirements, I believe, is that they are going to possibly need to have a CISO on a board or someone with like a cybersecurity background or something on boards now. But I mean, my board, for the most part, they trust what I say. Thank goodness. So I don't get too many far-fetched questions.
You said trust was part of it, yes?
Yeah, I don't get too many far-fetched questions. Now, I have experience where there's someone who believes that he may know more than I do, so he'll ask me these these questions like about AI, and are we doing anything about AI? I'm like, what about it? I mean, you can't just say, what are we doing about AI? What does that mean? I don't know. Where's the question? You know what I'm saying? So I haven't really had to feel, I haven't really had to field any like weird questions. It's just these, going forward, I'm sure we are going to have to, but they always say that they sleep well because of me, so that's good.
Good.
I'd like for them to sleep good, go ahead, because I do too, like I say. But yeah, no, nothing weird, but just know that you're going to have more, as this matures, the board is going to start to get more involved. They're going to want to know more about what you do. You're not just going to be over there in the corner as the first person to speak so they can get down to business type of thing. You're going to you're going to be more involved, and even from a risk standpoint, you know. And then, like you said, with cybersecurity, insurance, and all of this stuff is just maturing and growing. They're going to have to become more knowledgeable about that sector of the business, whereas before they didn't really have to necessarily because they focused on the financial part. And even tell us if we try to talk to them sometimes in financial terms, yeah, it's great, you know, but you're still part of IT and you want me to spend money, right? That's what it boils down to. Yeah. Even though we can talk, most of us can speak that language because we know how to do that from experience. But as time goes on, as cybersecurity continues to grow and, you know, just become this megalithic thing or whatever, we'll have more opportunity in the boardroom.
Great. Anybody else have?
Yeah, so I welcome the change, and I think the specifics of the language doesn't necessarily state that there has to be person on the board that's security, but more so that they have to have an expert advisor, and they need to be advised directly. So literally it's removing the filters. Like, for instance, there are still many in this field that still report to the CIO and isn't really considered a true C-level, right? It's almost like an under-C. But I think this helps to elevate us to that C-level so that when the board gets our message, they're getting it unfiltered. Unfiltered. The CIO does not want to tell on himself, right? So he'll filter your message to talk about some other things that he listed as a priority, but they weren't your priorities. This gives us an opportunity to speak directly to the board. That's why I encourage all of us, again, to learn the languages of business. But now you will have an opportunity to speak directly to. I will be expected to. But you're going to have to understand how they speak and even how they think, right? Which makes us really no different than any other C-level who've always had to do that. They're just older professions.
You're seeing fewer and fewer Luddites because more and more companies are depending on technology as part of their business plans. So we're seeing a shift in the boardroom away from, you know, people not now, and again, I'm never going to talk about a technology to my board or a tool. You're dead on there, but they are getting more sophisticated rapidly. The one thing that I think I'm starting to see edge into the discussions is when we talk about people, processes, and technology, people is starting to edge into boards' discussions. The fight for talent is incredible. You know, the amount of turnover some of us have seen in key people. And so I'm spending more time thinking about talent. I know we are all, sometimes I think talent keeps me up more than the threat does. So I think that's the one question that's kind of new or different that's coming into the boardroom.
Great. A whole other process for that, yes. So I think that's good. So I think we've got a lot of great insights on how do you communicate with the board. I think Ron's starting out with the relationships. I mean, not a bad idea. Figure out, you know, give them advice on their router, how to secure things at home. And I think, Liz, you touched on it too. We're all professionals in this organization, or in this field, excuse me. In this field, we carry the torch with us, not just at the office. It's at home, it's with your families, and can extend to, you know, personal cases with your CEO or with your board. It's about storytelling, understanding their language, putting it in terms they understand, and keeping it true to your mission. And understanding that your mission is to educate and advise them on it. It's not necessarily to explain. I like what you said, Ron. We're not going to talk tools, and you're not there to solve the problem necessarily. It's to advise and make sure they're educated on it. So now that we've established the state of the industry or the state of cybersecurity, we've talked about how we've communicated it. What are we doing to combat that? So, and as we're trying to combat it, we're nearing or edging in on what some would call an economic downturn and budgets being constrained. How are we seeing the budgets of cybersecurity and compliance being impacted, or are we?
So again, it goes back to structure And again, I am very fortunate to Dream Exchange not to have to constrain my budget to within IT's budget. Information security has its budget. Notice it was listed as information security, right? Because it has to cross those three parameters, our three towers. And then IT has a separate budget. So in that case, and as we get more visibility with the board, as we are now starting to be accepted as a classic C level, it gives us an opportunity to do like the rest of them are, fight for your budgets, right? They've always fought for their budgets. Now, we actually have an opportunity to fight for ourselves, which is great. Instead of worrying about what the IT guy or the CIO has fought, or CTO has fought for his budget, and then you taking a percentage of that. Because that literally limits you as to what you can do, what you can protect, and it just affects negatively the risk to the organization. So it is absolutely wonderful that I'm in a situation where I'm able to literally fight for it. And I think we all are moving to that place, right, where we get to fight for our own budget, and we just have to fight.
I think that this position is probably going to evolve into more of a chief data officer, because what our role is going to end up being is protecting the data. Yeah. And that's where we're going to get the board level buy-in, is because without the data, you're nothing. I mean, that's why we put systems in, to give us the information. Can we flex our business? Can we expand to another marketplace? Without the data, we can't make a decision, or nobody can make a decision. And you know, hospital, 2 years ago got hacked, and then they've tried to do a manual process and they couldn't do it. Okay, so you understand that. I just think that's just my prediction. It's just going to evolve into that, because that's what we have to protect in the end run.
Do you see specifically the security and compliance budget being treated
part of the data
differently,
part,
or
yeah.
being constrained along with an IT budget
I
or
don't.
other budget?
I think
Or is it
you're going to
surviving?
have to work together. But I mean, data's your core. I mean, they make business decisions based on the data, and no system has ever fulfilled it's what it said it was going to do as far as the chief executive officer is concerned. He's always tried to figure out, you know, when they acquire companies, they try to, you know, you got two systems running parallel, they try to integrate it, nothing ever wants to work right. He just wants to know what's the profitability. Am I really making money on this, or am I not? I mean, it's never delivered. I mean, let's be honest. We tried everything in the book, try to do it, but we were forced to buy from vendors that said, follow our structure, and then, you know, you can use our software. Well, sorry, it's become more customer-centric now. I need to know this so I can function. I need to know how I'm going to operate the next day. And that's why I think it's going to have to blend in. I mean, yeah, I do need hardware. I do need software, but what's going to be essential to keep that data where I need it to keep? I mean, this all started with the Target blast when you had a vendor come in the back end. I mean, they went off. You know, we've trained them. We taught them how to program Microsoft, all the Baltic states and stuff like that. So then they knew what the weak points were, and they went right after the swiping machines, because it was a $1 a card to get a secure card now, a secure chip card, as opposed to just a swipe card. So they just looked at it from a business perspective, not knowing what the impact was. So that's why I believe it's going to evolve into that, and it's going to have to, because either you protect your data or we don't, and then you got to make sure your personal data is off the internet so that they can't extort it and throw away that $300 billion company. Sorry.
Yeah.
And there you go. For me, I think we should be doing a better job of quantifying versus qualifying. We struggle with it. You know, there's FAIR and there's a couple other models out there. But, you know, we're not great at return on investment. We're doing better at reduction in risk, quantifying the reduction in risk. But I think all of us need to start thinking about and working with our other business partners in ways to talk about what they're getting from the budget. I don't think our budget's going to go down significantly, but I do think we need to do a better job of talking about what we're delivering for it.
Good. Liz, have you seen any impacts on your side with economic downturn?
My situation is a little different, because the business is going through like a split. So, I mean, the budget situation is a little bit different. But you do, for me, the story that I started with them, I inserted the different tools without telling them that it was a tool, but into that strategic plan, so they kind of like knew that this was coming up. I don't make it a habit of, just asking for additional funds every year. I do try to get that ROI out of our tools before we go move to the next step or the next tool or the next threat vector or whatever. So that's the way I do things. So I'm seen as more thoughtful in my requests. I've been told that by the CEO and the CIO that I'm more thoughtful, because most IT, they want everything and but they still haven't completed the implementation of the thing they bought the year before, But I do think that I am more strategic in how I plan out what I need to spend. And there's a reason behind it. I can show them what the reason is. I can show him what the risk is. I can show them what the vulnerability is. And you're right, it is about data, but if you think about our title, it's Chief Information Security. So, we're already protecting data. That is basically the core of what we're doing through not allowing people to get access to the environment, because that's the crown jewel is the data. So, whether they change the title, that's still what we're basically there to do, because that's usually the crown jewel for any organization is the data that they have. But I just try to be strategic in my ask. I don't want to, and I do report to the CIO. Okay. And at times there can be roadblocks, but a lot of times there aren't. She's pretty good about that. So anyway.
So, and you mentioned tools, so let me shift towards actual kind of tactics and security tools. What has been the biggest shift that you've seen in the last year or so in the approaches to security within your organization or within clients? Have you seen the shift from being reactive to trying to be proactive? Have you seen it on being more on top of patches or threat hunting, or where do you see it going?
Well, the one thing I've seen since, SolarWinds maybe, or Log4j, is now this big push for everyone to do these assessments. It's like third-party risk. All of a sudden, everybody has a third-party risk program, okay? And then they send out these assessments, because I have a bunch of them. But when I look at them, how did you identify the risk for your relationship with JVT? Don't give me a 300-question assessment when all we're going to do, you're buying a freezer. They just put together something with a questionnaire and said, this is third-party risk. Yes, you have to answer all those questions, but we don't pose a great risk to you guys. So you need to do a risk-based assessment based upon the risk of the relationship between your organization and the vendor or the customer or whatever. But they're not doing that. It's as though a CEO or somebody said, yeah, we need to do that, and they just threw something together. So that, to me, since a lot of these attacks or breaches that we've seen, has been like the major thing that I've seen. But they're not risk-based, and that's where they're causing an issue, because you can't just throw a questionnaire out there and you haven't even taken a look at or considered the risk to doing business with that organization.
Now, why did you point this way when you said the word risk? Breach. Yeah, right, there you go. I don't want it associated with my name.
I'm sorry,
There you go, thank you so much.
There's enough to go around.
But no, Liz is absolutely right. So when it comes to like risk assessments, for instance, I really try to understand the actual risk that third-party vendor causes. And at one point, I had several risk assessments, right? And it depended on what you were doing for us. Were you even touching my data, right? Did you just have employees' names? So there were several levels of risk. I've now been able to consolidate that down to one and then have a scoring system out of that. It took some work, but it's possible. But yeah, we need to not use these canned responses and canned reactions to things if we really want to be proactive. We need to really just start to understand what those risks are. And as we understand the risks, let's understand how to effectively analyze and assess the risk, and then ask questions to ensure that that party, that entity, has all of the appropriate questions there that would give us an understanding of how well they're taking care of their organization, their risk, and what impact it can have to us, period. Instead of having these canned responses that you can pull off the internet and simply send out and change the name on the top of it. Schools often do that. They put them online, and guess what? Companies go and pilfer them, and they become meaningless if you're not applying it to the appropriate place.
Okay.
Can I just say one more
go
thing?
ahead, yeah.
Because I just thought about it, because it's a pet peeve for me. When you have these SaaS applications, right? They're housed in AWS, Azure. You ask them for a SOC 2 or whatever. They send you Azure's. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Where's yours?
Right.
Oh no, well we're in Azure. Okay, but how do you secure your application? What are the controls that you have in place that must be effective based on ITGCs, based upon NIST, based upon CMMC, whatever it is, so that I can take a look at this and evaluate what you say you have in place? I mean, I can't really go in and test it, but oh no, we just use it. Well, then we can't do business with you because I don't know how secure your environment is. And I see that time and time again. Now, if that happens and the business still wants to go forth, that's fine. They sign a risk acceptance, and I'm done. Because I've informed and I've told you the risk, but I can't stop them from, making that decision. But I can pull IT out of the fray by saying, now you accept the risk because I've told you. But that is something that gets on my nerves.
Yeah, that's fair. So we've heard third-party risk, and those assessments might not be so risk-based. Any other?
I would say the thing, and my favorite slide today was Bill from Deep Watch when he threw up the number 76. 76 tools is the average number of tools a company has. And that's because for the longest time, we all went out and got the best athlete. Wanted the best this, the best that. And more companies are saying, listen, I can't have one engineer managing 4 tools because none of them are optimized. None of them are on the latest version. So more and more are going, horrible name, and it didn't gain much traction, but it was a great reflection on what the industry's thinking, that SASE, that vendor consolidation. More and more people are going to the best teammate. And that would be one of the things that I've consistently seen. I know back when I was looking at something, we had 3 different same tool, but over time, different departments had, so I had technical debt, so I consolidated on one tool. Something that simple. And then the other thing, with technical debt, which is one of the things I love to get on my soapbox about, is if you use all the features in something, if you optimize all your tools, you could probably get rid of a couple tools and not accept that much more risk.
So doesn't that help your budget side then, if you could free up some money? It kind of takes care of some of the budget issues.
Yes, often it will, but again, when I consolidated from 3 to 1, I had to buy so many more licenses than 1. It was the same overall number, but when I was able to actually get rid of a tool, because I optimized some others, then I was a hero for almost a full day.
So if you get, as long as you get agreement to keep whatever
to keep
money
it.
free up, that's the best part.
Great. So I've got one more question, and in the area of tactics and how do we combat the cyber threats and the risk there, I'll ask you to agree or disagree with this statement that it is impossible to stop all cyber attacks. So organizations should focus more of their resources on actually recovering from those cyber incidents. Do you agree with that? And if so, what does that focus look like? And if you don't agree with it, why?
I'm not sure it was a binary question, but if it were a binary question,
Let me make it binary. No,
I would put more money into firefighters than fire marshals.
Okay. So if you had to take money away from the prevention side of the detect and respond to attacks, would you take it away and give it more towards being able to respond better? because the
If,
incidents.
if I
inevitably-
evaluated that to give me a better return on risk reduction, yes. And at some point, that scale stops tipping.
Fair.
I got it right?
You got it right. Have you seen that happen at all?
I think the reality of the number of breaches has started to tip us towards more fighters, better fighters. I've said for years, fighting the threat that got inside and the insider threat needs to be better. Kind of that zero trust, that great in a candy bar, bad in a network, crunchy exterior, soft interior is bad.
Great.
Yeah, no, I concur, absolutely. But why does it have to be a question of take from this to add responsibilities here? Why can't I just show that there are, here, we have these risks. I should still have men at that door, right? Ready to block and tackle and do whatever they need to do to stop this guy from coming in. However, understanding that they will eventually get in, we also have to put an additional emphasis, not taken away from, but an additional emphasis on what do we do once they're in, because they still have to find their way through to get your data. You can do things like organize your data in ways. You can do things like add added protections around the true crown jewels of the organization. You can only do that by doing a data discovery of the entire organization, knowing everywhere your data is, because the data from my printer certainly won't be as valuable as the data coming out of my CEO's office, right? So understanding where those risks are, understanding where your data is, and then placing your crown jewel data with extra security around it, right? But then you still have to add resources to what do we do if they get in? How do we do it? Let's catch them before they get out. I'm more concerned about them getting out with my data than I am with them getting in.
Minimize dwell time.
Absolutely.
Very good. Very good.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. I think this was a lot of great information. So on the combating of cyber threats, told us to fight for your budget, try and get it separated out outside of IT in general. As part of doing that, try to quantify the benefits that we're delivering. And as part of that, I think Ron's point on data is key. Data is the asset of the enterprise, and helping them understand the impact of losing that data or it being compromised helps in that quantification story. I like that Liz is very thoughtful in making their requests. I mean, I think that shows some partnership and some trust being built there. Interesting, the third-party risk, so that makes sense. All the different supply chain breaches that have happened, so now the pendulum is switched, maybe swinging a little too far to say, we're gonna do third-party risk assessment on everything. Okay, it's my catering vendor at one location, overseas. I'm gonna run them through this 60-page risk questionnaire that I got online. Nowhere in there am I taking into view the true risk picture of likelihood and impact to the organization. So maybe helping your organization understand a true risk perspective there. And then also the tool bloat and the technical debt that Steve brought up, I think is another shift. And just as you're going out and buying all these tools maybe to increase your capabilities, on the back end of that is that technical debt that you'll be saddled with going forward. So this was very insightful. I hope online and in the room you guys enjoyed it and took some insights away. I want to thank our panel. And yeah, thank you, everyone.